Girls who dated older men as teenagers, only to find out they were creeps. Share your story. When I was around 15 or 16, my mom did something that now seems super creepy. She would set me up with older guys. Like, she'd take me to cafes or sneak me into bars to flirt with 20-something-year-old dudes just to introduce them to me. Then, they'd come over to our house to help out with things, painting the kitchen, fixing a shelf, or whatever needed doing. One of my best friend's moms actually tried to warn me. She said it was wrong for me, a 15-year-old girl, to be dating 25-year-old men. But I thought I was the coolest girl on the planet. It wasn't until years later, when one of those guys found me online and told me the truth, that I realized my mom was basically trading me for free labor. She doesn't even see it that way, even now. I'll always be bitter about it. This guy was my therapist. He was supposed to help me, but it turned into something seriously messed up. He ended up proposing to me. That's when I realized how twisted everything was. I was only 13, and I thought it was totally normal to be dating a 28-year-old man. He'd always compliment me, buy me gifts, and even give me rides wherever I needed. But now, looking back, I can't believe I didn't see how gross and wrong it all was. From what I hear, he's still out there, struggling to find a woman his own age. I'm 24 now, and the whole thing still makes me sick. At 16, one of my teachers, a guy in his mid-30s, started texting me creepy things. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Then, a few years later, I found out he married one of my classmates. That's when I realized how disgusting the whole situation had been. I never told anyone because I thought they'd blame me. But I wasn't the only one. Another girl at school had it even worse. He waited until she turned legal, and then slept with her. He eventually got fired when her mom reported him, but the whole school turned on her. He was everyone's favorite teacher, so they made her out to be the villain. I was 15, and I met a 30-year-old guy. He was the older brother of a kid I went to therapy with. He always told me how mature I was for my age. At the time, I thought I was so grown up. But now that I'm 24, it's disgusting to think about. A man his age talking to a 15-year-old is so messed up. But back then, I believed every word he said. When I was 13, I started dating a 22-year-old guy I met on Xbox Live. At school, I was that awkward, nerdy girl, and no guys my age were interested in me. So when this older guy gave me attention, it felt amazing. But he was a total creep. He started pushing me to do sexual stuff on webcam. Then we moved to physical things, and of course, he filmed it all. He claimed he couldn't even look at other porn because he loved me so much. But turns out, he was showing all our videos to his friends. They were even betting on how fast he could get me to do more. One night, he tried to get me to sleep with one of his friends. That's when I realized how screwed up it was and left him. When I was 14, I was dating a 25-year-old cop. He didn't know how old I was, and I didn't tell him. One day, we were chatting on the phone, and I mentioned I had to do homework. He was like, "Oh, college is tough, huh?" And I, thinking I was slick, said, "Nah, high school." Then, there was dead silence. After a moment, he flipped out. He started yelling about how he could go to jail and lose his job over me. After that, I never saw or heard from him again. I was 17, and I was engaged to a 26-year-old man. We had been together for 3 years, and I thought I loved him. Now, looking back, it's clear he was just a controlling jerk. The engagement ring he gave me? It was fake. He only gave it to me to shut me up, to control me, not out of love. He was an alcoholic, a narcissist, and a pedophile. I didn't see it at the time, but I was just a kid, and he wanted to keep me like that forever. I was 14 when we started dating, and he had me convinced I was mature for my age. I even stopped eating because he made me feel like I was gaining weight. I drank water all day, ate nothing with calories. I was literally starving myself to keep him happy. One day, after weeks of barely eating, I went to a flea market and bought myself some hot wings. As I was eating them, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I called him and broke it off. It took 3 years to fully cut him out of my life, but I canceled the wedding and never looked back. I was 11, and he was 23. We weren't technically dating, but he would send me disgusting texts and nudes. At first, I didn't even realize how wrong it was. But one day, it just hit me. This was weird as hell. I blocked him and never told anyone about it. Sometimes, I think about how much that whole thing messed me up, even though I was just a kid. I looked older for my age, and it felt like every creepy guy was constantly hitting on me. It took a long time for me to understand how much it affected me. When I was 15, I started dating this 21-year-old guy. He had this weird thing where he was always around younger girls, and at the time, I didn't think much of it. He made all of us feel special, like we were different, better than other girls. I was quiet and shy, and it felt amazing to finally get that kind of attention. He didn't even notice me until he found out my mom worked night shifts, which meant I was home alone. We dated for a while, but I started getting scared about my mom finding out. After weeks of avoiding him, we finally broke up, and looking back, I'm so glad I did. His attention felt like everything at the time, but now I see how manipulative it was. I was 17, and I was supposed to marry this 26-year-old guy. We had been together for 3 years, and at the time, I thought he was my whole world. The engagement ring he gave me? Totally fake, like our entire relationship. He was controlling, and made me think I had to change everything about myself to make him happy. He wanted me to be that innocent 14-year-old girl forever. He would constantly criticize my body, even though I was perfectly healthy. I stopped eating to stay thin for him, surviving on water and nothing else. One day, after starving myself for weeks, I had this epiphany while eating hot wings at the flea market. I couldn't live like this anymore. I called off the wedding and left him. It took a long time to fully get him out of my life, but I did it, and I've never looked back. I was 14, trying to act like I was so much older. There was this 19-year-old guy who was hooking up with one of my friends. They had sex without a condom, and she was furious because he wouldn't answer her texts afterward. I thought I could fix everything, so I started messaging him, trying to get him to apologize to her. But instead of apologizing, he started flirting with me. I was dumb enough to think I could handle it, so I flirted back. It escalated quickly. He asked me for nudes and kept talking about how we should meet up and have sex in public places. I got scared. I tried to ghost him, but he showed up outside my school one day. That's when I knew I had gotten in way over my head. I stayed quiet, didn't tell anyone, and just hoped it would all blow over. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life. When I was 15, I started dating this 21-year-old guy who worked at a local shop. All the girls at my school were obsessed with him, so I couldn't believe it when he chose me. I wasn't one of the popular girls, just a weird little goth kid, but he paid attention to me. We dated for about 4 months, and then I found out he was sleeping with 3 other girls my age. I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back, it makes sense. He was just using us all. The weirdest part? I kept begging him to take my virginity, but he never did. I thought it was because he didn't want me, but now I realize it was probably some sick power play. I was 14, and my friend told me she had slept with a 19-year-old guy without a condom. She was furious because he ghosted her after. I thought I could fix it, so I messaged him, trying to get him to apologize. Instead of apologizing, he started flirting with me. I thought I could handle it, but it spiraled out of control. He asked for nudes, and then it got worse. He wanted to meet up and have sex in public places. I freaked out and tried to ghost him, but he showed up at my school one day, waiting for me. That's when I knew I was in way over my head. I never told anyone, but I'll always regret not speaking up sooner. I was 14, dating this 25-year-old cop. He never asked my age, and I never bothered to tell him. He'd pick me up, take me places, and we'd talk for hours. He didn't suspect a thing. One night, we were chatting on the phone, and I casually mentioned I had to finish some homework. He chuckled and said, "Yeah, college work can be tough, huh?" Without thinking, I blurted out, "No, I'm still in high school." That's when the silence hit. It was dead quiet for what felt like forever. Then, out of nowhere, he exploded, his voice shaking. "Wait, how old are you?" I hesitated, realizing I'd messed up big time. 14, I whispered. The rage in his voice was immediate. "You know I could go to prison for this, right? You've got me screwed here." I froze, my heart pounding. I didn't realize until that moment how dangerous everything was. He hung up, and that was it. He ghosted me. No calls, no texts, nothing. I spent months terrified he'd come back, maybe furious or worse. But he never did. Now, every time I see a cop, my stomach drops, and I wonder if it's him. I was 13 when I met this guy on Xbox Live. He was 22, and I was just this awkward, geeky girl who nobody at school cared about. So when an older guy paid attention to me, I felt like I'd hit the jackpot. He made me feel like I was someone special, like I mattered. At first, it was just innocent flirting, but soon enough, he started pushing boundaries. It began with him asking for pics over webcam, and before I knew it, he was pressuring me to do more. One night, after weeks of talking, we met up in person, and things got physical. I still remember how excited I was. This hot older guy wanted me, and I thought it was love. But it wasn't. It was all a game to him. He filmed everything, telling me it was because he didn't want to look at other porn since he had me. But then I found out the truth. He was showing our videos to his friends, and they were betting on how quickly he could get me to do more. One day, he asked me to sleep with one of his friends. That's when I realized how deep I was in, and how disgusting the whole thing was. I blocked him on everything, but the damage was already done. I'd been played, and I didn't even see it coming. I was 15 when I started dating this 21-year-old guy who worked at a local shop. All the girls at my school were obsessed with him, and I couldn't believe it when he picked me. I wasn't one of the popular, pretty girls, just a quiet, awkward goth kid. But for some reason, he wanted me. We dated for a few months, and I thought everything was perfect. Then I found out the truth. He was sleeping with at least 3 other girls, all my age. It crushed me. I couldn't understand how he could do that when I was practically begging him to take my virginity, and he wouldn't. I thought he didn't want me, but it was something else, some twisted game he was playing. Looking back, I realized how much he messed with my head. The fact that I felt so desperate for his approval, so willing to throw myself at him, only to be rejected and cheated on, makes my skin crawl now. When I was 16, one of my high school teachers, who was in his mid-30s, started messaging me. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. He was cool. Everyone liked him, and I figured it was just harmless flirting. But the messages got weirder, more suggestive. I didn't realize how wrong it was until years later. Fast forward a few years, and I found out he'd married one of my classmates. That's when it all hit me. This wasn't just harmless flirting, it was grooming. I never told anyone because I didn't want to be blamed or called a liar. But I wasn't the only one. Another girl in my class had it worse. He waited until she turned 18, and then he slept with her. She told her mom, who reported him, and he got fired. But the worst part? Everyone at school turned on her. They loved him, and she became the villain for speaking out. It was awful to watch, and I've always felt guilty for staying quiet. I was 17, and I was supposed to marry this 26-year-old man I'd been dating for 3 years. I thought I loved him, thought he was everything I needed. Looking back now, I see how blind I was. He was manipulative, controlling, and a complete narcissist. He'd given me a fake engagement ring, something cheap and meaningless, just to keep me quiet and compliant. He constantly criticized my body, telling me I'd gained too much weight, even though I was healthy. I stopped eating altogether, surviving on water and barely anything else. I became obsessed with staying thin for him, not realizing how deeply he was damaging me. One day, after weeks of starving myself, I broke. I went to the flea market, bought a plate of hot wings, and just sat there, eating and crying. That's when it hit me. This was my life, and I couldn't live like this anymore. I called him and told him it was over. It took years to finally free myself from him completely, but that was the start. I canceled the wedding, and I never looked back. It's taken almost a decade for me to realize how much he messed with my head, how he wanted to keep me as that young, naive 14-year-old girl forever. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about all these stories. Don't forget to check out our other videos.